Okay. My Zoomers. Okay. The other. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to welcome you all to day two of the Ehingbeti 2021 Summit. So permit me to stand on all existing protocols, and I want to welcome you to this pillar that's going to be discussing the fourth industrial revolution and the imperatives and prospects for a digital economy. In this session, my distinguished panelists will highlight the imperatives and prospects for a greater Lagos and set the tone for the next decade. My panelists will provide forward-looking insights on how Lagos can actualize and become the digital hub for African technology and innovation. Today, let me introduce my panelists. First on is Mr. Segun Ogunsanya, the Managing Director and CEO of Airtel Nigeria. Welcome, Mr. Ogunsanya. Nice to see you. Then we also have Ms. Funke Okweke, the CEO of Main One. Nice to see you, Funke. Thank you. We also have Mr. Tommy Davis, the Chief Investment Officer at Green Tech Capital Partners. Nice to see you, TD, and welcome. And also we have Mr. Inyi Aboyeji, the founder and CEO of Future Africa. I was going to say CEO Africa. Well, maybe that's what the future of Africa looks like. Morning, and thank you, E. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to get started, and it's great to see you all, and I'm glad that we're taking the time here to share our insights on what could set the tone for the future of Lagos. So I'm going to get started, and I'll start with you, TD. You know, we've seen the knowledge economy. It's not a recent phenomenon, but in your opinion, why are the digital technologies not mainstream in Nigerian businesses and governments?
It's not new because if you go back nearly 2 decades, because we're talking 2005, 2004, we were naive enough to believe that what we needed to give people at that time were devices. So we had things like the Computer for All Nigeria initiative, which was targeting government and civil servants, and at the same time trying to work on education. We introduced the one laptop per child program. Uh, one is the wiser now because the challenges we identified critical to 4IR, first being the lack of infrastructure. Um, First thing we noticed or we find as a challenge is the fact that availability is a problem. Fiber installation growth is there, but it's really, really slow. But probably more important is the fact that we don't even have a national backbone network for high-speed internet. So that means we are dependent as a nation on mobile broadband. Um, and that means the growth inhibitors that kick in are things like infrastructure and sector development. When you look at the institutional governance itself, it's actually quite a complex setup because on the one hand, you're dealing with the NCC, on the other hand, you're dealing with MIDA, and it means that the operators themselves who have to deploy proprietary networks have inadequate infrastructure. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a high underserved area. And if you look at these areas, it's not that people haven't tried, but the high cost of infrastructure deployment in them compared with the low revenues that come back means that, you know, inherently you have market failure, especially when you consider the market's high price sensitivity. Finally, we have some critical access barriers. First, digital illiteracy. Okay, you need basic literacy to be able to acquire digital literacy. So that's the first issue we've got. The second is lack of local content. Okay, we talk about Nollywood as a case in point, but we haven't done much about it. Add low electrification rates to that. And finally, the fact that affordability of broadband enabled devices, especially for the bottom of the pyramid people we're looking at, is a significant challenge. So those are the reasons why both government and enterprise have been unable to actually get the kind of traction that we require within Nigeria. I trust that helps.
Thanks, TD. It will come back to some of the issues you mentioned because you sort of highlighted and expanded on the low connectivity and the infrastructure levels. But then I was hoping Funke would have joined us by now because you specifically referred to broadband. But I'm going to sort of ask Segun to take that question. And I think because you specifically mentioned on the fact that we're dependent on mobile broadband, Segun, can you share with us some of the strategies that you're deploying to ensure that we can actually have a broad base of broadband and accessible to rural communities as well? Thank you.
Let me start by just touching base on the tied to the Industrial Revolution, the first one. Because we missed out on the first one, we missed out on the second one. Third one is where we are now, and we're already going to the fourth one. It would be a tragedy if we miss out on the fourth Industrial Revolution. We would not be forgiven by future generations. So we need to do whatever it takes to catch up on that fourth Industrial Revolution, which is where we're in now. She did mention the fact that broadband is facilitated by fiber. It is also provided by wireless access, which is what the four big telcos, I mean, that's what we provide. What we found out is like the digital divide is even wider than the coverage divide. We've got a lot more people covered by our broadband, the operators, more than the digital divide we're talking about. Why is this difference? I think TD referred to it as the content gap. The knowledge gap means people don't know how the gap is relevant to their needs. The third one, which is the affordability gap. Can they afford those devices? So those are the issues we need to think about. But as a government, if you're talking about how to join this wagon of the fourth industrial revolution, what is critical is internet access. That's the foundation. But there are 4 or 5 components of the fourth revolution. We talk about the ultra high-speed access, which is a broadband that my friend referred to earlier. We also have to worry about the smart devices. We have to look at the applications, what the applications we can use this for. But the most important is the government policy. How enabling is the policy? How enabling are the policies that governments in various parts of the country together to support broadband penetration? There cannot be any industrial revolution. This fourth revolution, the digitalization will not work unless we have a very pervasive and broadband access. I don't think that broadband should be defined as a human rights, access to water, access to health service, in expansion of without it's going to be almost impossible. How can I talk about Nigeria as a whole? I say bigger picture. But if you're able to break into smaller pockets and see how the small pockets can begin to create any change that can actually encourage other states to follow suit. If you look at Lagos, if you can create what I call a digital highway, a fiber optic highway to Korodu to Badagry, so that off digital centers. So my view, my idea of a digital Lagos is a combination of a fiber optic highway that is supported by digital centers that are created in each of the thing we have about 20 government areas in Lagos. The digital center in each of those government areas that can be extended to 37 local capacity development areas at some point. So once you have the digital highway that is going to just in the enabling to create that digital highway that cannot be extended to various digital centers in various local government areas. What are these centers going to provide? The typical digital center, let's say it's one in Ekpe, one in Ikorodu, one in Badagry, in all the local government areas. You can walk into this digital center and have access to health services, basic health services. They can have access to basic financial services, probably money transfer. You can receive any government subvention, if any. Have access to skill acquisition program, probably basic maybe basic plumbing activities. You can have access to it.
Okay, we seem to have lost Shegun, but I think what Shegun was trying to say is that how do we create public goods, digital public goods that we can make accessible to all communities, and knowing that there are many access hurdles, as TD rightly mentioned, how do we bridge those gaps by having these access centers ready and able to serve, but not just serve with providing digital services, but also the ancillary value-added services like financial services, healthcare. So it's an all-encompassing center. So E, let me come to you, because I think that you are the one that has sort of come into this community and has done what we're all expecting other youth to do. So what changed for you? What brought you in? And how did you sort of decide to stay in? E? E?
Yes.
Boyaji?
Hello, yes,
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
fantastic.
We can hear you.
Sorry
now.
about
Great.
that. I apologize. I couldn't mute myself. I think that, at the heart of all these, of the plans, there's a very big oversight that I think the prior generations of Nigerians very easily make, partly because they take the oversight for granted, given kind of, a long history of deep investment in education by Awolowo and, people that came during that era. And that is that the most important factor in all of this is talent. And when I came into the market in 2013, it was very obvious, right? That you had the raw human capital, you had, very deep investments in infrastructure. You had a lot of enthusiasm around what the possibilities were. But ultimately, where you kept getting cut down at your knees was that you didn't have the talent to accomplish all these amazing things. And it's still the big albatross for us, both in terms of Lagos and in terms of the rest of the country today. When we started with Andela, it was a very strategic decision, because when we're thinking about the ecosystem over the long term, right, we quickly realized that we wouldn't go very far if we didn't handle decisively the question of talent. And we chose to do it in a way that would give leeway to other people to basically adopt the same model, replicate it, and scale it, which is what we're very happy has happened. And I think the Google's last report is an indicator of what's possible in just a few years. I think it's been less than 6 years since we started Andela. And you have this explosion of senior software engineers, over 85,000 of them in Lagos, who are working all over the world, who have this expertise. So I think, again, the critical infrastructure for building in the fourth industrial revolution, the infrastructure matters, absolutely. Broadband, critical, right? But if you're not doing all of this with a huge focus on talent, which is where, you know, I feel like some of the work that Baba Davies was doing back in the day was very foresightful, right? And there is a world where we have to go back to those concepts, especially now that we have a bunch of other things in place, including an entire army of educators on the internet who are willing to help us educate our kids, and all this new knowledge that needs to be gained. We need to go back to that extreme focus on talent. How do we build an army of talent in Lagos for the fourth industrial revolution? If we don't solve that question, the truth of the matter is that we will make a lot of great investments in infrastructure, but they will end up being white elephant projects.
Great, thank you, E. And I think that what you're telling us is going back to, you started Andela to focus on talent, but that was the supply side of the curve, right? And I think we still also need to build the demand side, like TD rightly mentioned. But when we're looking at the future, and so let's look at it. So Mr. Ogusanya was saying that we skipped several industrial revolutions, true. But now we're here, and I think one thing that we've seen is that the COVID-19 pandemic was really, truly a catalyst for the fourth industrial revolution and digital transformation. But Mr. Ogusanya, I want to come back to you, and just let's look at it and sum it up from where you were before in terms of how have we seen technology change businesses? Who have been the winners? Who have been the losers? Well, I know that a lot of us in the digital space have been winners because broadband, data, and all these things have exploded. But how do we enable some of the organizations to pivot and build the resilience in the digital space? And I want you to share your thoughts on this, please.
Oh, thank you. I got locked out at some point, but glad to be back. I don't think COVID was the cause of the digitalization. I think COVID is just a trigger. A lot of governments started this journey way before COVID, but when COVID came, it just accelerated the journey to digitalization. So I wouldn't even call some industries as losers. I would just say the companies that are very slow to react to the new ways of doing things. So I would classify the companies into two categories. The ones who started the journey much earlier, and we just stood on the momentum provided by COVID to accelerate the digital journey, and the others who are relatively slow in catching on the campaign. Which industries are these? Industries that require less of a face-to-face contact. They're probably more structured to succeed in the post-COVID areas, and these are industries like medical supply and services. We have food processing. We have personal and health care. We have ICT, where I belong to, e-commerce, online entertainment. TD mentioned Nollywood, how quickly Nollywood can digitalize. We have courier companies who keep delivering stuff to companies and to individuals. And we have mobile financial services. They rode on the momentum created by COVID because people avoided face-to-face contact. Who enabled this? This was enabled by connectivity, enabled by digitalization. So the more of this we have, the more prosperous these companies are going to be. And if I'm to talk about those who had handicaps, I don't want to call them those. I'm just going to describe as those who had a lot of handicaps. There are companies that had challenges because of demand gaps. People are just not able to go to them and buy what they are providing. I'm going to mention schools. Most of the schools are still, on lockdown. A few financial services, manufacturing, of course, got impacted. Construction and real estate, people are unable to continue construction when you're told to stay at home. We have aviation, people don't travel. Tourism and a bit of oil and gas. But how do you mitigate the challenges that COVID posed to those companies? There are 4 or 5 broad guidelines. I would suggest. One is for them to look at creating, an omnichannel experience for their customers. Don't rely solely on face-to-face contract. You can use technology to create access and communication with your customers. There are so many technologies you can use now: WhatsApp, USSD, apps, web, various ways of engaging your customers. That's very essential. But the most important one is how to use analytics to really create your strategies. Because information is so much available now. Data is the new oil. I mentioned oil and gas as one of those being impacted. But with the pervasiveness of internet now, data is so much available. With that data, you can extract the analytics you need to create customer journey, to create what customers want, what they don't like, and use that to design your journey. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is how do we use analytics that are readily available now to extract insights and use that to create the right customer journey. And then the third thing, how do you digitize all of the interfaces? Government-citizen interface, government, employee, company employee, those interfaces, they're already there, but how do we digitalize them so that it makes it easier for people to engage with you in terms of buying services or exchanging goods with you? And the last one is about e-governance, which is what is very probably important to Lagos State government. I know of countries where you don't even need to see anyone before you pay for your passport, before you get your passport. I know of a country whereby if you want to apply for right of way, we mentioned that fiber is a major enabler to digitalization, major enabler to broadband penetration. I know of a country whereby you just go online, you go to a portal, you send in your application for right of way, you select the routes where you want to lay fiber, you get a bill for the fees, you pay online, and you print your receipt. This can be done within 1 hour, all online without leaving your offices. So how do we create this government-citizen interface that government can use to interface with their various stakeholders, be it individuals, be it corporates, so that they can create a seamless environment for them? I'm very clear that the post-COVID environment is going to be a different environment from what it was before. So the winners are going to be those who are able to ride on the momentum, those who are not going to be left behind, so that we can create a much more prosperous community for every. It'd be a tragedy again if you leave so many people behind, because it's going to come back to haunt us. So my final prayer is like, how do we make this broadband journey inclusive so that everyone, people in the rural areas, those of us in the urban areas, would enjoy this boom and use this boom to create a lot more prosperity for everyone concerned.
Great. Thank you, Segun. And thanks to all my panelists for the brief insights they've shared, and they're introductory. But I think now, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer panel, and we'll be able to address them later. But I think that the whole idea of why we're here is really to think about the future. We're here not to talk about the past, but we're really here to say, how do we actualize the digital Lagos that we all dream of? Because the theme of the conference is for a greater Lagos, and we're trying to come out with solutions and plans for the next decade. And I think Segun has mentioned one in terms of this issue about digitizing government services. Why do I have to wake up and go to Alausa or somewhere else to apply for a license, or even go to Abuja when it's the national license in that sense? So, but while we're trying to envision, oh, Funke, you're here. Thank you very much. Nice to see you. So let me come back to you and can you just tell us in terms of, we've talked a lot about infrastructure and the provision of infrastructure and data, and that was why Main One was established. What did you see in 2010 when you started the journey?
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, starting in 2010, what did I see? And I think Segun Ogunsanjo just spoke to some of that vision. it is bridging that digital divide and having our parts of the world catch up with the what I would say more advanced economies in terms of the digitization that had started going on in those markets. And if you look at what has happened in those markets, a lot of services have migrated online, be they government services, social services, education in particular, and doing business. And at that time, we had very limited connectivity, very limited access to the internet, one or two small ISPs, or you had to go to a cyber cafe to get on the internet, which really left our large youth population at a disadvantage in large urban areas like Lagos in terms of productivity. So that was a vision in connecting more citizens to the internet online in a 21st century economy. We cannot be competitive without having that basic access. And that is what has fueled the vision, still fueling the vision. COVID obviously has accelerated the pace of that transition for those who were on. But in our society, there's still a lot of services that are not equipped to be delivered online. And there are a lot of citizens that do not have the quality or quantity of access that is required to function effectively in the digital world. And that still fuels our work today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Funke. So now we're going to go into a different motion of now envisioning the future. So I'm going to start with TD because I think Ian has also mentioned that you started this futurist services a while back. So TD, in your own opinion, what should a digital Lagos look like? Can you help us envision that?
Well, I quite like his thinking. Like I said, he's standing on shoulders and looking ahead. But how about if we said that all 15-year-olds in Lagos must be digitally literate with basic digital skills? Or if we decided to say, look, how about 100,000 graduates annually with advanced digital skills? Now, those are hard targets. You give it to the education system and let them figure it out. Entrepreneurship is going to work us out of this. We've got to look at new digitally enabled businesses. How about trying to triple those each year? Funke, I talked about infrastructure, but I think government, in my opinion, should look at some kind of universal internet coverage. Like Shevin was saying, almost as a right. So digital rights are the kind of things we could be looking at. How about doubling our broadband capacity each year and every year and setting that as a target instead of looking at military? I know it sounds radical, but we're starting to move in the right direction with BVN, NIN, but we should aspire to a situation where individual identity has digital proof, and I don't really need any physical thing to tell you who I am. Let's target to get half the population using the internet for government services and commercial services. Now, those are clear targets. Why don't we aim for things like that? Because what's going to happen? Well, if you look at reduction of broadband costs, put in complementary public access, increase the household access to computers and access to the internet. We just, a few months ago, right here in Lagos, we're talking about smart infrastructure. Funke has talked about digital Lagos. I know she said, oh, it's 2 years old or what have you. But it's not like we're bereft of ideas. There are a whole bunch of ideas already laid out, not just in thinking, but also in paper. They just need execution. That's just my view of it. But thumbs up, I think talent takes top priority. In my view, infrastructure is next, then innovation and tech adoption. And like Shebu said, empowering society, we've got to get digital natives. Okay, citizen to government is critical. I don't want to keep going sounding like a broken record, but we cannot educate with the structures we've got right now. This learning by rote, antiquated industrial type learning systems don't work.
Okay, great.
We've got technology, we've got to start taking advantage of them to get to where we need to be. Okay. So those are just some of the thoughts. Over to you guys.
Any other thoughts, Funke Shegun on the future?
I think a lot of those targets are set in the National Broadband Plan for 2025, to be honest. And as I said, there's an acceleration, be it, of course, identity, which, as you mentioned, is now being seriously taken on, chaotic, but nonetheless being taken on. But the issue of having internet access to schools, having at least 70% of our population accessing 4G services, having improvement in throughput or data rates in both urban and rural areas. So I think, and addressing the issues of digital literacy, as you said. So I think we're not bereft of ideas, and putting government services online. I think the challenges lie more in implementation, execution, who's going to do what, when, how does it make commercial sense, and what is the role of government, what is the role of private sector, and how do we work together to make these things happen?
Thank you, Funke. So that's the national broadband, and I think Lagos has already commenced the deployment by having the fiber rollout across the state. But Shegun, going back to that whole idea of fiber rollout, and we're talking about inclusiveness and ensuring that we don't create yet another digital divide. And you also mentioned this issue about cost to serve. How do we get it to the last mile? And yes, we have this, you've given us the strategy of the digital centers and things like that, but as a business who also deals in the last mile, how do we get it to the homes at the last mile as well?
Yeah, I mean, there are two clear vectors of providing broadband. We've got the wired one, the fiber, and we have the wireless. Both are equally important. But where we are now, the cost to deliver the wireless version, 4G, 5G broadband, is cheaper than the wired one. And we have speeds comparable to what the wired connectivity is giving. So I would suggest a twin approach. One approach is to focus on the wired connectivity, laying fiber, a lot more expensive, a lot more labor intensive, requires right of way, a lot more stuff is involved, breaking people's garages and parts, what have you, more long lasting. But if you want to really, leapfrog into the future, I think we should also have a very clear roadmap into using wireless technologies to deliver broadband. There are new technologies now that deliver speeds very comparable to what the wired broadband does. But more importantly, how do we get everybody engaged? Because it's one thing to create the access, it's another thing to create the use cases. It's not a means on its own, it's a means to an end. So we must actually create the use cases for customers who want to willingly buy this. There's no point in creating a highway when there are no cars to ride on the highway. So it should be, what exactly are we going to put on this highway? What are the use cases? What are the applications? We mentioned government services. Earlier when I was talking about health facilities, I mentioned education services. So we just can't create a highway alone without making sure there is a use for that highway. You can't just create a road from Lagos to Ibadan without making sure there's something that we're going to do in Ibadan. So the clear use cases must be well established. The devices must be affordable. The government must provide the right environment for private sector to take the lead. I don't think it's the exclusive preserve of government to lay fiber or to create a highway. If you bring all of this together, the government, the private sector, the communities where the fiber is or the wireless access is going to be provided, and create a lot of use cases that benefit the customers, relevant use cases to them. I'm very encouraged that very soon we're going to begin to reap the rewards of digitalization. And this can be done very quickly, by the way. We have an Indian origin. We're a multinational company, started in India. I know in some regions in India, the government took a very ambitious target of connecting every village by fiber, and a number of them already completed that. They've connected a number of villages to fiber. There's a center in every village where anybody can walk into and enjoy what we all take for granted in urban areas. So it must be a very inclusive approach. You must get everybody on this journey, whether in Maiduguri, whether in Lagos, whether in Abuja. Everybody must partake in this digitalization so that the benefits can be being spread.
Great, thank you, Shegun. So basically, we know that we can acquire the hard infrastructure if we have the intent and we design it. But I'm going to come to you here because you've been very involved in the startup ecosystem, in the whole Yabacon Valley and things like that. And you form a base that represents the middleware. So Shegun mentioned we need use cases, so we need to build the demand. What's going on in the tech ecosystem and how are they helping bridge that gap to building the demand?
I mean, I think we've done quite a bit already in terms of building the demand. But before I kind of get into that, I did want to say something about the previous point that was made up about the vision. I think 7 years in Nigeria, which is not a long time, and you quickly learn, realism, as I call it. And one of the big realisms is simply that, we often come up with these very big visions, but the political realities cannot accommodate them. So yes, it's going to take a tremendous amount of political will for Lagos to be able to build out, all these things that we've talked about. And it's great for us to be optimistic about it. But the reality is just, the reps of, many, the politicians we have in the system today just don't have the range, unfortunately. So I think we have to start thinking about a different approach to achieving the same things. And that means that we have to kind of become more creative about the approaches that we take to actually delivering these outcomes. For me, while we can harp on infrastructure or talent or platforms or entrepreneurship, all of them are part of a digital economy ecosystem. And the reality is that one cannot exist without the other. That's why we're having this conversation about demand and supply. But what works, because it's been proven, is that if we actually get serious about developing a few clusters, we can show the rest of the political class how beneficial this can be, and then we can kind of grow that into a model that everybody can then adopt. But this whole, the expansionism is not going to work because, no one believes it's going to change outcomes. And so, Yaba is one cluster that we try to get the government to take seriously, but unfortunately, they're all over the place with the strategy. And so they're not taking it seriously. Ekpe looks like it's going to be another cluster. If we take it seriously, it has a bit more advantage than Yaba because you're not dealing with property of folks who, old colonial properties and so on and so forth. Will the government take it seriously? Will the government take the Lagos Free Trade Zone seriously and actually work with private sector, give us a space where we can operate and show you what's possible in the space, right? And then, you can then show that. You can bring all the politicians to Ekpe in 2025 and say, look at what we did in Ekpe. It looks sane and people can live here and people have broadband and they have 24/7 power and they have all these things that are the building blocks of the ecosystem. Look at what we did. And do you want it in your neighborhood? If you want it in your neighborhood, then let us pass this all over Lagos. But we have to take an incrementalist approach that's driven by focusing on specific clusters. Otherwise, we're just going to end up in this never-ending cycle of expansionist dreaming and no execution. Okay. Now, back to the question of the middle layer, just very quickly. The big issue right now is the lack of coordination, right? Just absolute lack of coordination between the people who are building the middle layer, the infrastructure that the government is building, and the regulation and policies that are supposed to encourage an economic and a digital economy in Lagos, right? It seems like we're all speaking different languages. And until that challenge is resolved. And I think it's easier to resolve that challenge in a free trade zone, because I do acknowledge the political realities of Lagos. You know, people have different agendas, people have different interests to satisfy, and I get it. So I'm not going to expect too much from the government there. However, I think we can get that coordination, like I said earlier, if we focus on clusters. If we say, look, this is, you can trial, you know, safe Okada passenger in this area, right? With these companies, and no one else is allowed to operate here. The ARTW, you have the rest of Lagos to worry about. You know, let's leave it alone. Or you tell the agricultors, look, we can be part of a digitally driven, you know, revenue generation system in this local government. Everywhere else in Lagos, you know, the rest of the other kind of crap that happens can happen. But in this area, you know, you can, if there's that coordination in specific areas, we can help build the case. But right now, the reality is Lagos is a leaking basket for investment in tech, right? Because there hasn't been a concerted, coordinated effort to work with the players to actually grow value. And until that happens, and I understand the political realities that make it difficult for that to happen today, but the reality is that until we have a roadmap for how we start from one cluster and grow the rest of Lagos, we're going to continue waving in the wind.
Okay, thanks for that, E. And I think that we need to address some of these challenges, because that's what we're here to do. And yes, there will be constraints, but we also need to look at how we can overcome some of these constraints to ensure that we move forward. And I like what you said in the sense where we need to coordinate these things better, because it seems that there are many fragmented initiatives going on, but yet how do we stitch them together to get the outcomes? And I think there's a panel going to be looking at smart cities, and maybe that could be one of the cluster concepts that we think about and build up, and we can replicate in different locations. But then again, thank you all for setting the vision and trying to get us looking out and looking forward. So I think right now, how do we sort of continue to build out Lagos? So Segun, you started out with financial inclusion, and I want to talk about financial inclusion because whether we like it or not, in a high-touch or a low-touch kind of ecosystem, financial transactions and value must be exchanged. How do we address some of these issues? Because even in Lagos, for example, our markets are still very cash-oriented. So I'm going to ask any of my panelists to speak to this topic, because it's something that we need to address and it's something we need to do. So yes, 42 million BVNs and accounts is still not enough to get the whole population moving. Any thoughts, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, I'd like to take a shot at this on financial inclusion, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. Banks, the way they are configured, they're configured to deal with very few customers and large balances. Telcos, the way we are configured, we're configured to deal with very many customers with small balances. So we've been engaging various regulatory authorities, but now we can be part of the financial ecosystem to drive financial inclusion. And I'm sure that the authorities are looking at this very favorably. So I think for this leap to happen, we must allow those who are very used to dealing with large number of customers with small balances. That's who we are. An average customer spends about 500 naira a month on telco services. And we have so many people who spend very small amounts of money on services in a month. So we know how to deal with very large number of customers with small balances. So for financial inclusion to work efficiently, I think telcos must be allowed to play a very large part in this space, so that we can bring a lot more people to the system very quickly. Let me give you an internal example. Pre-COVID, we sold less than 20% of airtime using digital channels. It was the physical vouchers we bought. As I speak now, about 40% of our sales are through digital channels. We don't even see the customer. That shows if you create a good vehicle, if you create a good means for customers to be financially included in a seamless environment, they're going to adopt it. So it's not as if the customers don't know or they don't want to. It's now left for everyone, the companies who offer the services, the governments who create the right environment, the regulators who should permit innovators to work efficiently. Once all this come together, customers are willing. Nobody wants to be spreading cash all around unless, you have something you want to cover. If you have anything to cover, you're free to use the electronic means to make payment. So I think the people are ready. I think the onus is on us, it's on the regulators. and companies to create the right environment for customers to willingly digitalize their payments so that we can have a lot more information about what people do, what people like, what they don't like. But I must confess, it is working for us. Pre-COVID, about 20% of my cash came from people who paid in cash. As I speak now, over 40% people are using digital channels to pay us for our services. It shows what can be done in less than a year if the right environment is there and the right customer journey is created to make it easier for customers to adopt that digital journey.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shegun. Anyone else want to chime in on that? So Shegun has mentioned that we need to focus on the customer. The value proposition must exist for the customer to want to make that switch. Anyone else? Okay, no problem. So we also talked about regulation, and this is one thing we need to be mindful about, that at industry levels we have our national regulators. But I want us to narrow down and filter down to our subnational Lagos. What do we want the state to do in terms of the enabling environment? And can we be specific? What do we want from the state? What actions do we want from an enabling environment? What actions do we want from the state in creating the technology entrepreneurship ecosystem that we so desire? What actions do we want from the state to coordinate the initiatives that are currently going on? And I'm going to go round robin on this one, and I'll start with you, Ian.
Yeah, I think, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think the first thing is that, I know we have Lagos Innovates, and I know we have a number of initiatives already ongoing. But I think there is a necessity for the government to take particular interest in engaging with people in the ecosystem regularly. Thankfully, thanks to Corona, we can all kind of meet from wherever we are in the world. But many of us, because of certain challenges, we have to run our businesses from all over the world. And we might be busy, we might not be in one location. But I think there's a need for a forum where innovators can meet with the state government, and the state government has to adopt the same client mentality that it has with the banking industry, with the manufacturing industry. It appears like all those other people get consultation and then we just get bans, right? If Lagos State wants more innovation, then it has to engage with us because we're the ones who are building out that world for Lagos State. And it has to engage with us with the same level of consideration and I would dare say respect as it deals with bankers and telecoms heads and everybody else. If they continue to think that innovation is something they can call their cousin to do for them, that's fine, but it's not going to take the state forward, which is very sad and I think would limit all of us. So I think as a near term, there's a need for that forum for conversation between innovators and the state government. There's a popular example with the state of Miami, which has overnight, pretty much stolen the crown from San Francisco as pretty much the center or an emerging center of the tech ecosystem. And what did it take? It just took a leadership that was willing to engage with innovators. They haven't done anything groundbreaking, but they've just been willing to sit in the same room with innovators and say, what are your challenges and what are your concerns? And I think when that happens more often, you'll find that a lot of us are very reasonable and we understand the government's constraints and are willing to help. But if Marina House just wants to be sending us bans, we would adapt to that. But we're not going to build a digital economy that way.
Okay, great. Thank you, E. How about you, Funke?
Okay, thank you. I want to build on what Inyi said because, and I heard him when he talked about expansionist dreaming, and I wouldn't call it dreaming, but I would say, Lagos is a, densely populated state. It has a large economy, and the government has to think big and think of all the people. But we know that execution is a challenge and follow through, and that the best way to achieve results is to leverage the capacity and what all members of society, government, the communities, private sector, and in particular the tech ecosystem bring to the table. So I mean, perhaps going back and saying with all the infrastructure that's being laid around Lagos and the work that's being done, let's focus on actually taking some areas further as model areas. So we start and actually complete the vision in those areas. And there are lots of ideas. I mean, I think Yaba started, and at some point along the way, lots of new ideas came up, but the vision has never been fully executed.
Thank you.
Execute and complete what we want to do in Yaba. Get schools connected. Get the Yaba is being an old district. It has hospitals. It has schools. It has now, if the federal government completes it, the train station. Has population, University of Lagos, Yaba Tech. And it has entrepreneurs. It has young software developers. It has some of these companies who are there. Can we really try to take it and make it not the leaky basket that it's become, but let it start to attract investment, scale, and that entrepreneurial drive again. Inye also talked about Ekpe, which I was surprised to hear him talking about. But we're getting excited about the investments that are going on there in terms of industrialization and housing. And again, can we come up with a program for Ekpe in a similar way that tries to build an ecosystem? And those could be just two models. But I think we have to be expansionist. And so the state in building infrastructure needs to have an expansionist approach. We're too many, and the stress is much for all economic caters in Lagos. So definitely expansionist infrastructure plays are important. But in terms of really developing tech, getting ready for the fourth industrial revolution, empowering citizens and showing what can be done, it might be helpful to really focus on some of these model areas and really take them to a high degree of completion so they can actually attract the investment we need and build up the capacity to go replicate that across the state. That is what I would ask.
Thank you, Funke. So I think that you're thinking about, let's work on proof of concept. Let's take a Yaba that we've started, build it out, learn from it, develop it, use that as an example, and then we can sort of move that across the state. And then we would have different lessons, because I think that nothing is homogeneous across the state, and we need to be mindful of that. Shegun, how about you? Shegun?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Great.
The government should start by adopting technologies in everything they do as well, so that they showcase the value in technology. There's no point in having a paper office when you can actually go paperless. So by showing examples, by showing that they also adopt innovation, they can encourage a lot more people to adopt innovation. The second thing I would suggest is we need to link so many hotspots, with broadband access, hospitals, schools, local government areas. Those are the foundation of a modern economy. Are they actually linked with broadband? Can you walk into a school and access internet from a school? Can you walk into the hospital and access internet? Local government areas, are they linked together? Those are practical things that the government can do to create a foundation for explosion of technology. And finally, I would like to suggest that government should stop seeing technology as a revenue spinner, as an opportunity for making money. It shouldn't be. It's an enabler. It enables so many other things. We can make money from those industries being enabled by technology. If you change focus, if you remove obstacles on the part of technology companies and let them focus on creating opportunities for industry that sit on them to thrive, then the money can come from those industries, while the technology companies can continue to innovate and create a multiplier effect that creates a lot more prosperity for us. So those are my three asks. One, focus on creating access to key areas. Second, create linkages. And third, encourage technology companies to do what they can do and don't overtax them. Let them be enablers of other industry that you can now extract any revenue from. And finally,
you mentioned also digitizing government and leading by example.
Finally, yes, that was what I was going to say.
Great, great, thank you. And TD?
Well, I mean, let's not over-castigate government, all right? And I would want Funke to cast her mind back when we had the Yaba 2030 vision. And we went to Lagos State and said, look, we'd like a ring that goes from Uigbo to Jibo and back. Okay, that's what we would like. And I think comment. And we had a mesh system. CC Hub thrived from the design, you know. And she's right, you know, we were coitus interruptus. We're still halfway through building out the Yaba vision. And I quite love what he said about the cluster concept. And it's not a proof of concept, please. What we are talking of is creating ecosystems, self-containable ecosystems, starting with Yaba. And we can prove the economic viability of this. We've had these long discussions about them, okay? But they stand as reference models. It's like saying you want to replicate Silicon Valley. You can't do it. Okay, you're going to do something different, and that's why the City of London is different to Silicon Valley, but they're both financial instruments. So finish the Yaba construct, point one. The plans and everything exist. Take a look, okay, at Ekpe and other clusters. If memory serves me right, there was a detailed research done, and we know where the clusters of excellence are. So, for example, we knew the printers, for example, were in Shomolu. We know that when it comes to food service, I think it was in somewhere in VI, when it came to advertising and media, it was centered around Ikeja, etc. So understanding, you know, where the centers of excellence are for digitization purposes, I think is a credible strategy that has been espoused here. But as we talk, let's not forget where we started, and I quite want to take us back to what he was saying. We start with talent. So it's not the fact that whether the schools have broadband or not, it's whether the kids are digitally literate or not. Okay, that is critically important because they are the ones who are going to build whatever, okay, we're starting with. That's the beginning. Second, yeah, I would say it's digital entrepreneurship, technology-enabled companies, fundamental. We've talked about financial services, platforms, and last but not the least, definitely is infrastructure and policy. All of them have a place, but the challenge, okay, for those listening in Lagos State, okay, to which I belong, is this. We have, the plans are there. It's about it. You heard, let's engage and execute together. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, TD. Okay, so basically we know we've gotten a lot of concepts, and I think they're not new ones. It's really just about continuity and completion, and then being able to grow and migrate and move on. But I want us to sort of dig a little deeper into this engagement platforms, because I know that that's something that we said we need, and this is one of the fora that we're using to build, to describe that, to discuss that. But what will that look like to you? Because it's also nice to say, okay, we know we want to create a platform, but what should that platform look like? And again, who hosts it? Because I think that that's another challenge, where who is the ombudsman that's going to host such a platform to ensure that everyone has fair access and fair game?
I think those are great questions. I mean, again, the ecosystem has proven a capacity to come together to work towards collective interests multiple different times. I recall at the onset of some of the challenges that we continue to have around police harassment of our employees. You know, we approached the state government quite a number of times as a group to have those conversations. Ultimately, you know, at the end of the day, the government has convening power if they are if they will it, right, to listen. I don't think there's any citizen of Lagos who will receive summons from his governor and disregard it, right? At least I won't. And there's a capacity to bring our people together if there is a seriousness and there is intention around execution, right? So I think the critical element here is, if government says, rather than just the big conferences, here are, by tax, a few businesses that are paying tax in Lagos. I know my business pays tax to Lagos, as well as many other businesses that are founded and remain in Lagos. Look at the biggest businesses by tax. Let's come together. Let's have a conversation. What is working? What is not working? And there's a clear action plan and detailed responsibilities for each person. I think that if that happens, then and we start to see a few things happen. Because it's one thing to have the conversation; it's another thing to see the action that proves that the conversation wasn't just a talk shop. Once we start to see that, and trust is rebuilt between the technology community and the government, I think you're going to see amazing things happen, because technologists want to work for Lagos. Technology community wants to work for Lagos. We want to give Lagos ideas. We want to build things for Lagos. But if there's no interface, and the only time we get to see the government is when they're telling us, not to do things. I remember during the ban. Let me use that as a focal point, because we've unfortunately only organized around issues in reaction to governments, as opposed to organizing proactively to help direct government's roadmap, because both sides are not listening. However, when the ban happened, I remember gathering a bunch of the players together, putting together a plan for safe bike rides in Lagos. But there was no point of engagement, right? A few proposals were sent here and there. The ban was the ban, and that was it. And that was the end. The bike riders have now moved to delivery, where they're thriving. And I don't know that the conversation will come up again. But the dangers that were identified and we were trying to resolve with passenger bikes have emerged on the streets, right? To the embarrassment of Lagos and to outcomes that are not undesirable by all of us. So these are the issues where there's no point of engagement. We're not getting people in the government side who can make decisions, coming to the table, engaging with us, and actually responding to some of to some of the feedback or suggestions that we have. I don't know why, but that's what the issues are, and that trust has to be rebuilt between the technology industry and the government.
Okay, great. Ian, I'm happy to tell you all that, Ehingbet is not a talk shop. It's out of the 210 resolutions that have happened in the 20 years, 190 have been implemented. And I have the Deputy Governor online now. He's also going to comment to the fact that we're not just here to talk, we're not just here to waste anyone's time. Your Excellency, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, and thanks to everybody, the panel, Ilua, Funke, my brother, TD, everybody. Thank you very much. So I think it's important that we say things the way they are. So that, and what that does is it serves as an encouragement to even other governments. That, if Lagos can do this, why can't you do it? Why can't? So, because what I'm hearing is that, so for example, Lua says that government doesn't engage. That's not true. That's not true. So for example, we have the Art of Innovation and Technology 1 and 2. If you recall, and I don't want to, take you out as if I'm, so unfortunately you were unable to attend the first one because you have a conflict. But the second one, you were a panelist. And what did we do at the first one? It was to set a master plan. It was done here, and I attended. There were a lot of technology guys and based on that, they said, we need to engage with tech startups. We raised a fund of 100 and something million. And at the second one, we actually gave out 100 million to tech startups based on the conversation that we had at the first one to say, we need to engage more, we need to assist people. So the truth is, so what I would love to hear is, this is what is going on, it's not enough, how do we expand it so that we can, so that we don't discourage other state governments? Because I tell you this, state government contact us to say, oh, this is your out of technology, what's the outcome? But if government is now being discouraged, I think that's also dangerous. So what needs to happen is, okay, what are the things that are being done? How do we get it better? So for example, like I said, we have the open data program that came out from the Art of Technology 1 at that discussion. Because people are saying we have ideas. And, you know, I don't need to know the deputy governor. I don't need to know the commissioner before I want that idea. So we created like a basket where people can drop those ideas and then we can interact. And that's been going on. That's how we're able to select those 10 startups. They didn't even come to Alausa. It was a technology base. They just drop it in there. And then we even have the open data program, the open data, the open source. So there's been a lot of interactions. Now, is it enough? Maybe not. But to say that there is none, that's not correct. But how do we make it better? I think that's what we need to do. Then in terms of, you know, so we must understand we live in a country and we are a sovereign. We are having challenges even with our federal government. I was talking yesterday at the panel that Lagos State government needs to pay a federal agency money in order to build a bridge. So NIWA, we charge Lagos State government to go and pay some money in order to, which is part of our constitution. So we fight even with federal government. So the reality is that I want Segun to please tell us, so that because we've discussed it when we meet businesses. So we've heard about this multiplicity of taxes. Let's be specific. Because we've asked, please give it so that we can all come together and say, well, these are taxes, these are administrative fees, so everybody knows. And I think we've not actually get that response. So if there, because a lot have been said, multiplicity of taxes, multiplicity of, but please, let's get that list so that we can sit down and say, oh, no, this is wrong, this is ridiculous, this shouldn't happen. Help us to have that understanding so that, because nobody has given us a list. No, nobody. And we've had, before COVID, we have conference with businesses, business meetings, 2-3 hours where we invite businesses. But let's get a list so that we can know and work with it. We can even, within that committee, we can form a committee of businesses and us, and we resolve it. So we need, in terms of engaging, and for example, I think maybe when Segun was talking about not using it as revenue, I think you were probably talking about the digging of grants, laying cables, and so on. So if you recall, what we said is this: we cannot solve a problem, but create another problem. So in trying to lay fiber, we cannot destroy the roads. If you recall, one of the things we said is, okay, if you have to dig the road, just put it back. You are not paying us. So it's not a revenue. It's to say, okay, don't let us, and that's why we came to what we are doing now, where we said, okay, and we put it out there transparently to say, okay, why don't we build the infrastructure? That's what the state of Maryland did. We build the infrastructure, you lease it, and then we just move on. You don't need to dig any ground. So we are doing 3,000 kilometers. So that is part of interaction with the community to say, okay, people just want to lease. The people are not, I don't think telcos are interested in digging ground, whatever. They just want to lay their fiber and move on to the people. So that's part of the things that we've done. And that has helped us to connect today about 100 schools, 100 primary and secondary schools. Of course, is that enough? No. But so I think first of all, I think people must separate state government from federal government and then help us to understand what are the challenges that you are facing that the state can resolve. There are certain things that is federal, and we are also resolving with federal. I mean, for example, we just put up something in Apapa now, and we are fighting Federal Ministry of Transportation. They are saying, well, Lagos State doesn't own Apapa. Fine, but so that will always be that interactions and whatever. But even if it is federal, and you let us know, we will make a case. So I think that it is important for us to understand what the state is doing and how do we do it better. But to say it doesn't exist, no, it does. And as such, it's important for us to see how we can even make it better given what is existing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency has said his door is open. Give me specifics. Let's not talk in broad terms, right? And we would always take it to His Excellency. You can come through me. I will personally transport it to Alausa for all of you. Don't worry. But I think also what we also need to be mindful of that Your Excellency has laid out is the information asymmetries. There are many things going on that we are so unaware of. So how do we bridge these gaps? And I think that we need to have a community. If we're already digital, right, so we can continue in this stead. We need to have this digital community so the information is there. Because to be honest with you, this is the first time I'm hearing of out of technology or data, open data and things like that. And I'm in the space as well, so although in a different world. But thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. There's one question that I want us to sort of address for one of our panelists, Joanna Adonde. And Joanna says, technology is a double-edged sword, like everything else in the world. How can we effectively protect the citizenry from the negatives, e.g., fake news, inappropriate materials, etc.? And this is one of the areas that we need to talk about, because when we're talking about making it a public good, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So how do we help our citizens and protect our citizens from the ills of technology as well? Because in the digital space, we're seeing today more cyberbullying and more of these inappropriate behaviors that damage our youth. So I would ask any one of you who has a thought on this to chime in. Ian, go ahead.
Sorry. So yeah, again, it boils back to the point I made about talent. I feel like, you know, the organizations. I mean, one thing I'll tell you is I'm a big fan of regulation of technology, because as that the attendee correctly noted, Mrs. Joanna, that you know, it's a double-edged sword. It's a tool, it's a utility. So it can be used for good and it can also be used for bad, and that's why regulation of technology is a good idea. However, it is important that the people who regulate technology have an understanding of what they are regulating. And oftentimes we find that that is not the case. And it's because, you know, government, well, first of all, the talent is not in abundant supply. The talent that deeply understands this technology is not in abundant supply, which is back to my question about talent, right? Except we take that seriously and build people who deeply understand how technology works, and can engage with technology providers and platforms at a global level, we're not going to get the results that we're looking for. But more importantly, on the government side, it's important that they engage deeply with technologies that have the national interest at heart, so they can help with coordinated responses to these social ills. So there is technology, for example. I mean, the beautiful thing about things like fake news, there are probably 3 or 4 major platforms through which such things proliferate, right? There are ways to directly engage with those platforms and support their efforts in ensuring that inappropriate materials and fake news don't spread, right? On the other end of things, right, in terms of, you know, the internet, there are very strong filters that can help ensure that, you know, people have safe access to the internet. There's a lot of communities that are building interesting resources and work streams around these things. So these are things that would happen if, you know, when we can engage at that level, especially on the talent question, and say, okay, what is appropriate regulation look like, and who should be doing that regulation? What level of knowledge should they have about this? And I think that's how we can get the benefits of technology while further reducing the cost. And I just want to say one really quick thing. The challenge, I think, like you mentioned, is information asymmetry. And I think a big part of that challenge of information asymmetry is that when the perspective from the government side is that startups are small companies, you know, that need funding, you know, that perspective can be extremely pervasive, and it turns into a situation where innovation challenges and funding are the solution to every problem. The reality is that funding comes traditionally from the venture capital industry, right? And it comes as a result of wins and returns that it gains from those who have got into scale. So if there isn't an interplay between supporting and enhancing the experience of those that are at scale, trust me, government will fund the industry from now for the next 50 years and nothing will happen. Because government is not a traditional funder of technology businesses. So it's very important to understand government's role. Enable those who are at scale right? And build ecosystems for those who are coming beneath, right? That's the trade-off that works. But unfortunately, oftentimes the impression I get is that the thinking is, look, we need to help these small businesses. Well, look, the big businesses are driving the majority of the jobs. I can tell you for free. They're paying the majority of the taxes. I can tell you for free. And they're attracting the majority of the investments. It is now when people like me who've invested in these big businesses make my money, I now go and look for the small guys. But if value is being erased from the billion naira players, trust me, the small guys won't even get a shot. Because those investors who invested in Flutterwave, they will not come and look for the next one.
So true. I think what you're saying is that let's all know the roles we're all going to play in the ecosystem. Let's know that there's a domino effect that we can create when everybody plays their roles, and then we can do it organically as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's amazing how 75 minutes flies, and we can have this conversation for the rest of the day because there's a lot to talk about. But I want to join you to engage in the discussion forum going on. There's going to be one on smart cities, there's going to be one on disruptive innovation, and there's going to be one on e-government, which are themes that we already talked about, but we're going to dig a little deeper in those sessions. And I want to say thank you to the panelists because you've given us concrete ideas of how we move forward. And I think that's the whole idea of having a session like this. Concrete ideas, and these are going to go back to the Lagos State government, and we're going to come back knocking at your doors and saying, okay, how can you help us implement? Because we're all here as a consortium, public and private sector, to ensure that we can implement all these initiatives in the technology space, to ensure that, as Segun said, technology is an enabler. It's an enabler of good quality life for each and every Lagosian. And then in 10 years' time, when the decade is over, we can say that we truly did build a greater Lagos. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and have a good day.